Hi, my name is Rick Bloodworth, and today is day 38 of the 90-day study through the New Testament. The study today is going to be from Acts chapter 21 to Acts chapter 22, and there are several lessons that we can draw from these two chapters that are really important for us to learn. And so I thought we would look at one in particular to begin with, and that involves Paul coming into Jerusalem. As you'll recall, Paul now knows that he is starting to near the end of his ministry. As a matter of fact, when he was at Ephesus and talking to them, they all understood that this was likely the last time they would ever see him. One of the miraculous gifts that were present during the first century that God gave to the church was the gift of prophecy, and there were several people who had warned Paul of some of the things that were about to happen, and so they were all very concerned for Paul, and for good reason. Well, Paul goes and visits with the church there, and they talk about some of the successes that he's had, how thousands of Jews have become Christians through his teaching. But they said there is a problem. Some of the Jews are very concerned that you're teaching them not to follow the customs of Moses. And so here we have a question. When we become Christians, do we have to give up our heritage, especially our national heritage or our racial heritage? Do we have to just quit with all of that? And as we read through this, we find out that that's not the case. As a matter of fact, they let them know that the Jews are still welcome to circumcise their children. They're still welcome to celebrate certain Jewish customs that were passed down by Moses. The thing is, they can't use them as articles of salvation. As a matter of fact, we just saw in our previous study how those who were teaching that you had to be circumcised in order to be saved were severely chastised for that. But again, we come to this idea, can the Jews still honor the customs that were passed down by Moses? Do they still get to be Jews by heritage, in other words? And the answer was a resounding yes, they certainly could. We see some of the apostles celebrating the feast days and doing a number of things that were according to the customs of Moses. The difference was they were no longer bound to these things as far as salvation went. They were Jews, and so from the Jewish standpoint, not only could they take part in these things, but they were expected to take part in these things in many instances. And so now Paul is going to try and soothe some of the Jews who think that he is teaching them to go completely away from their racial heritage and their religious heritage. And so that's what he's doing here. He takes some men and he has them purified, and they're at the temple, and they're at about the seventh day of this purification rite. It's nearly over when some of the Jews from Asia spot him in the temple. Well, when they do that, they start a riot, and they drag Paul out, and they start to beat him. Well, when that happens, the Romans step in. The tribune comes up, and he stops what's going on, and he's about to take Paul away, and Paul talks to the tribune, the Roman tribune, in Greek, and he asks if he can address the crowd. Well, the Roman tribune thought he was a criminal, an Egyptian that had caused an uprising, and when he found out that that wasn't who Paul was, he let him talk to the crowd. And so Paul began to speak to those who were assembled there. He talked about his conversion, about how Jesus appeared to him while he was on the road to Damascus, and how he commanded him to go into Damascus where he'd be told what to do. When he got to Damascus, he met Ananias, and Ananias healed Paul of the blindness that he had received from the vision that he had had with Christ 3 days earlier. And he also commanded him to get up and be baptized and wash away his sins, calling on Jesus' name. By the way, I might mention this as well. I think a few studies ago I mentioned that this had actually occurred before Festus and King Agrippa. He is going to relate some of this to them a couple of years later, but obviously this in Acts chapter 22, he's talking to and 21 and 22, he's talking to the Jewish crowd. So that's the situation there. But anyway, when he starts to talk to the people, he points out some other things about how stiff-necked they can be, and when he does that, the riot starts all over again, and so the Roman soldiers have to rescue Paul from being literally torn apart by the crowd. Well, when they do that, they take him into the barracks. They're going to flog him to try and find out why this riot has occurred. And that's when Paul reveals to them that he's a Roman citizen. And when they find that out, they stop any plans they had to flog him. As a matter of fact, they had bound him, and you can't bind a Roman citizen without severe penalties, and so they were very concerned, and of course they untied him and they released him. But here's the point. When people become Christians, sometimes they think they have to give up everything. You can no longer celebrate your heritage, whether we're talking about your racial background or whether we're talking about your national background or your cultural background. And nothing could be further from the truth. As long as we don't take these things and make them part of our religion or require other people to do our customs in order to be Christians or in order to be saved, we can still do them. As a matter of fact, I'm an American. I still get to celebrate the 4th of July. I still get to honor the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. I still get to celebrate President's Day and Thanksgiving and all sorts of things that we have as customs and as part of our heritage as Americans. And so wherever you're from, you still get to enjoy those things. But you cannot take part in things that are contrary to Christianity. And so for those who had come out of pagan idolatrous worship, they could no longer continue in those items that they were worshiping, these pagan deities. They could no longer take part in sin, in other words. And so we certainly can't do that either. But again, we don't have to give up, those of us who are Americans, being an American or our past or our culture, just as the Jews didn't have to give up their culture or their past or their heritage. We just can't bring these things in to our worship or into required items for salvation or anything like that. And so that's an important distinction. It also gives us, I believe, a great deal of peace. We still get to be who we are. We just cannot start taking those things and making them a requirement for other people to come to Christ, or take things that are part of our culture and add them to the worship if they're not already part of the worship described in the New Testament. So anyway, a lot in there, but a lot of interesting things, and I believe a lot of things of comfort as well. Well, that's the lesson for today. I hope that as you go through your study today, that you will not only enjoy it, but you'll pick up things maybe that you've never had thought about before, and as you have throughout this entire study. But anyway, hope that your study goes well today, and I hope we'll see you tomorrow.